Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation, and this is a community to community call. The goal of this call is to have the agenda set by the fire affected communities, and what we do is then we connect them and their questions with people who are experienced in that area of post-disaster recovery. Thank you for those of you who are able to join us today. As I said in the preamble before we were recording, Santa Cruz is under a lot of evacuations and emergency alerts. Therefore, their ability to participate is limited. Probably not. Is anybody here from Santa Cruz? I think I know most of you. No? Okay. We might have to follow up with them. This was asked for though by the Alameda fire survivors in Southern Oregon. Pete, in case you didn't know, this is an arson fire that started in Ashland, but then took out two very important workforce communities just that border them on the north that sit between Highway 99 and 5, and took out both of the towns. Just really a lot of damage, a lot of mobile home parks, and not very economically diverse, really important population. And there are passionate people from Talent and Phoenix here that Rebuild has been working with for several months now, just in a technical advisory. What can we do? How can we help? This is the second block captains meeting that we've had. The first one, which Tucker really pointed out well with Nicole the other day, was really like a theory, like, oh, this is something you could do, and we highly recommend that you do. But now they are in the stage where they are actually doing it, and so they wanted to sort of circle back and talk to you all. So let me tell you who we're featuring today on the call. First, I want to say Jenna Johnson, thank you, from the campfire in, as you're all very well aware, in Paradise. Jenna and another woman named Kyla actually started the zone captains in their area after attending a convening that we put together in March of 2018, about 6 months post-disaster. They did it on the way home. They had a 5-hour drive with weather, much like we have today. And so it was really a remarkable feat. So I'm going to actually have Jenna go first and introduce herself, but I want to tell you who else is on the call. Pete Parkinson. I love Pete. Pete is like a double win, and here's why I'm going to tell you. Pete lives in the Bennett Ridge community, which is very rural, and they lost a ton of homes in the Tubbs and Nuns fires of 2017. Pete, though, was the head of our building department for the county, now called Permit Sonoma, for a very long time. And then he became the department head for the same interim in Napa. So he actually knows a ton about building codes. He's rebuilt his own home. He's helped his neighborhood, and he's a block captain rural. And then we have Pam, and so happy to have Pam. So most of you have heard of Coffee Park because you saw them in the news all the time, and they created Coffee Strong, which also used the block captain system. They are now their own 501c3, very successful. They have managed to stay in the front of the news cycle, which is incredibly hard, 3+ years post-disaster. A lot of that is due to Pam. What I said to her a couple of weeks ago was, oh, I know that she is ridiculously talented, and she put those talents to work for her community, just like everybody else that we have on this call. And also Charles Brooks is here from Rebuild Paradise Foundation. It's a long-term recovery organization like ours. I feel like I mentored him the first year, and then he sort of lapped me in years 2 and 3. So that's ideal. Couldn't be any happier. So I will go ahead and figure out who else is on the call. Aiko Sophie, why don't you introduce yourself? Let's do really brief, under like 20-second introduction so we can get right into it. By the way, if we run out of questions and we're before the 90-minute time limit, I won't hold you on the call just because I want to see your beautiful faces. Okay, fair enough. Aiko Sophie, why don't you start?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aiko Sophie Zaki. I am the Director of Community Affairs with Rebuild. I have been with Rebuild for the past just over a year, and I'm going to be working a lot more with the community group. So I look forward to getting to know you all a little bit better. I did ask that everybody put their name, their org that they're affiliated with, and their email address in the chat if you haven't done that already. Thank you.
Thanks, Psycho Sophie. Tucker.
Hi, I'm Tucker Teutsch. I'm the Executive Director of Remake Talent. We're also a long-term recovery organization here, starting in talent, but also, our work isn't just within the town. So we also work in Phoenix and Ashland and South Medford as well. We are, along with a few other people in this group, kind of holding that embryonic nascent zone captains program that we're developing, and I'm happy to show you all a little bit more later on. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. And Nicole? And I need to get to Jenna, has to leave at 2:30, so I'm really trying to make sure that we give her a chance. Go ahead, Nicole.
Hey, I'm Nicole. I'm having a terrible echo with Tucker's computer.
Okay. Nicole works with Tucker. That's the whole staff, which I can relate to.
Hey, sorry about that. We're at the same table at opposite ends. Zoom is challenging to navigate sometimes. So I'm his assistant for Remake Talent, and heavily involved with the Zone Captains program and the launch of that program here in the wake of the Alameda fire.
Great, thank you. Ellie.
Hi, I'm Ellie Holte. I am working with Nicole and Tucker and Julie and others on the Zone Captain concept here in the Rogue Valley. And my organization is an internship program with SOU. So there is one of our former interns on this call, and we're placing students in projects all over the Valley for related to rebuild efforts.
Karina, thank you.
Hello, my name is Karina. I'm an SOU student, and like Ellie stated, I'm one of the former interns from last term. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi, I'm Julie O'Dwyer. I'm with My Valley, My Home, as well as the Ashland Food Co-op, and I'm working with Tucker and Ellie and Nicole and Karina and many others to do the Zone Captain program here after the Alameda fire. Thanks so much for doing this, Jennifer.
Thank you. Elib.
Hi, I'm Elib Christwire. I work for Rogue Action Center as a housing justice coordinator here post-fire. And I work with Rogue Climate running our mutual aid site here in Phoenix. We've been in this Zone Captains conversation with Remake Talent and other orgs and trying to figure out how we can best plug folks into this conversation who we've been working with and supporting through the fire site. So thanks.
Thank you. Red Solutions Medford.
Hi, sorry, Alex Campbell. I'm with Regional Solutions, which is a program in the governor's office in Oregon, and I'm based in Southern Oregon.
Thank you. Sarah.
Hey there, you'll have to forgive my terrible sound quality. I'm Sarah Mosser, and I'm here to support Remake Talent. I also am the outreach coordinator for Rogue River Keeper, one of the water keeper programs.
We love them. Lucy.
Hi, everyone. I am Lucy Brossard. I carry many, I'll just preface it with that. My 8 to 5 job is working as an executive assistant for our assistant superintendent of student programs and academics at the Phoenix Talent School District. My post-recovery task with the school district is the Latinx and migrant outreach coordinator. And just as of recently, I was announced the president of the Jackson County Community Long-Term Recovery Group. So I've kind of been working with a lot of different of these people, and Tucker approached me about the zone captains, and so I've been very interested in that. So I'm just glad to be here and learn more for the many hats that I wear now throughout this process.
Fantastic. I love that. Eric, you just joined us. And Eric Ornis, you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, hi, Eric Ornis, and I'm here in Bonnie Doon, and sat in on one of your sessions when you presented to the group, and I was just interested to hear more. Lisa, who I think is going to be coming, had passed this along to me, and I'm just very interested to hear more about it.
We're so happy to have you. We know that you are in a bit of a perilous situation there in Bonnie Doon, so thank you for taking the time. We're going to try to get to Jenna really quickly, but I just want to introduce Sidra. Sidra, will you introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, having difficulty getting off mute. Sidra Goldwater. I work for Fannie Mae's Disaster Response and Recovery Team. We work with communities across the country to help them rebuild and recover from natural disasters.
Thank you, Sidra. I think everybody else are speakers or participants. So Jenna, can you just briefly introduce yourself and talk about sort of the challenge that, you know, what the work that you guys did and amazing. I'll say that. So you were a normal person one day on November 7th, 2018.
Normal.
Yeah.
My name is Jenna Johnson. I am the executive director for the Campfire Zone Project. I just did numbers because I started a bio, Jen. We have 32 captains and there's 42 areas that we're actually covering right now. Those areas encompass the CAL FIRE evacuation map. We didn't feel that we needed to reinvent the wheel. I know what like Santa Rosa did was super awesome. You know, they had defined neighborhoods, whereas we are more rural. And so that was not really feasible for us. So we literally took the CAL FIRE map and they had these, you know, predetermined zone areas for evacuation and corresponding evacuation routes. And we took that and basically assigned a zone captain to each zone. At first, we asked that in the early stages, we asked that those who stepped up to volunteer for their zone either were living there, had lived there, or were actively rebuilding. A few people, their homes survived, and so they, you know, stepped up in those areas. Now we've evolved a little bit. We have some people helping who haven't even ever lived in Paradise. So yeah, that about sums it up quickly.
Yeah. So I am mindful of the fact that you have to leave. So Pete, can you give us a 1-minute synopsis on who you were on October 7th, 2017, and then what you've done since in under 2 minutes. So sorry, I'm just trying to get to this part. Oh, can't hear you. Pete, I wonder if maybe we should have you leave audio and call in on your phone. Maybe Iko Sophie can help you with that. So this is the rural community. You can all relate. He's out in the boonies a little bit. So are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Oh.
Okay, it's better. Go ahead.
So you can hear me now?
Better.
Okay.
Okay, I take it back. Not better. Iko Sophie, can you help Pete through the chat to leave audio on Zoom and then call in? I'll go ahead and go to Pam. Hi, Pam. Who are you on October 7th? I mean, some of them have already heard from you, but I'm just really loving that question.
Sure. Well, I was a mom of 3 kids, a public school teacher who is a librarian at a big Title I school in Petaluma. And also I was an advocate for children's rights with Common Sense Kids Action, helping kids who had been through trauma in their life. So yeah, I was active, I was busy, and then suddenly my house burned down and everything changed. I had a million questions, but we librarians and educators like to inquire. So I started immediately making a long list of questions and seeking answers, crowdsourcing answers. And I found out that there were some other neighbors kind of similarly motivated right off the bat to try to find, like, what the heck do we do? We had never heard of something like this. And my neighborhood, you know, thousands of houses burned that night, but my neighborhood has had 1,400 homes leveled in that one evening, one night. And just to figure out what is my first step. So with that, banding together with some neighbors, we got the help of our county supervisor
Joined the meeting.
to divide our area and our neighborhood into areas and assign block captains. And I took the lead in strategic communications and vetting information and protecting privacy of those people, of everybody that we were private information and shielding us from vultures, basically.
Oh, and they're going to have those questions for sure. So, Pete, can you hear? Can you? You are. I think you're muted down there. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Okay, I asked Pete to unmute. You know, we're going to do while he works on that. So, for those of you that have, Charles Brooks is on the call, but he's really he wasn't a block captain, but of course he knows how to interface with block captains and zone captains. And so I asked him if he wouldn't mind. But Jenna, I only have her for, oh, is that you, Pete?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me?
Just quickly, yeah, can you give us the 1 minute Pete Parkinson introduction, and then I'm going to go to Jenna for 10 minutes. And then you guys will have the rest of the time.
Sure. So prior to the fire in 2017, I was happily retired, enjoying life. My house burned down. 135 house neighborhood burned down, and we're all.
It's not good. Shoot.
What's that?
Do you have a landline, Pete?
Yeah. No. You still can't hear me?
I'm so sorry. It's really bad,
Okay.
your connection. So let's try it on a landline. And sorry about that.
Okay, will do.
Okay, you're the best. I appreciate it. All right, so let's go for so all of you, the areas that we're talking about in Southern Oregon are pretty much on their way. Now we do have Jody is here from Santa Cruz Relief, and then we have Eric from Bonnie Doon. They've not yet organized in this way, so it's very helpful. But in Talent, you guys in Phoenix, you guys are further down the road. So Jenna, why don't you unmute yourself and I'll go on mute, and then you can just start calling on people who are asking me, who have questions. You look very, yeah, just go ahead and start with questions for Jenna and Paradise. Like, oh, social media, she can talk to you about that. She can talk to you about how to handle the folks. Yeah, go ahead, Tucker.
Well, so we're at the point where we're trying to kind of game out the next few steps, and it might be really useful to hear about sort of the onboarding process of zone captains, as well. Maybe probably be after you leave, but I'm happy to send it to you. I'd love to kind of play a little 3-minute video about sort of Zone Captains 101 in the Alameda Fire area, and what we're going to be doing in English and in Spanish, but some people are on the call here managing the rollout of that. And there's a number of organizations we're trying to figure out, once that's out in the open, that there's zone captains, you can sign up, you can get involved with your zone captains. What are the steps involved in making that an effective program?
Yeah, so I feel like that might be a 2-part question. And the first part I really want to touch on because I did it so wrong.
Join the meeting.
We, in the beginning, we were like, yeah, everybody, anybody, you want to help, like put on your hat and boots and let's go walk this town. And that was not, it didn't work. First of all, what I wish someone had told me was, hey, get together with the people are gonna, be in this for the long haul, and kind of come up with almost a list, which is what we have today. A list, or I don't want to say contract because I don't like that word, but basically like a set of guidelines that, one, they have to abide by, because we've had some people go rogue on us, and 2, a list of expectations. A lot of people think that by helping or volunteering, it's what fits in this box, and unfortunately it doesn't really always fit in a box. And so we found, after doing it wrong, that the best way to vet someone or, you know, inform someone. The education piece when bringing on a volunteer is to tell them, hey, look, this is what we do all the time. This is how much time you think you're going to be in for it. You know, that could change. It could be less. It could be a lot more. You know, 2 years later, we've lost several zone captains. And then I know everyone kind of does it differently, but one of the huge premises of our system was that it was non-political. So we were firm about it, and we lost a lot of people because I was like, you can't say that, you can't say that, you can't post that, you can't talk to people like that. And it's hard when you don't have that set of guidelines or that set of rules to say you violated this secret moral code that we have that you didn't tell them that you have. So that's like probably my best piece of advice in terms of who to recruit. Community members. Don't turn away anyone. If anyone reads that guidelines or those sets of rules or whatever you want to create for them and they say yes, they think they can do it, by all means, you know, we all have different talents. They can be useful in some aspect. You're on mute.
We have a, you know, you can send us a PDF of sort of the not job description, but a brief description of the JD of the zone captain. If you have a set of guidelines or stuff you've used in the past, we're really at that point where we need to start making that web portal and getting it sort of set up with those next steps. If you have that, share it. That'd be really super helpful.
Sure, I can do that.
Yeah, and then I think there was a two-part question, so I'm not sure what the second part.
Yeah, we'll go to Tucker and then we'll go to Julie because we only have Jenna 5 more minutes.
I think the second part of the question was just, I think you were asking like how to do the recruiting, and I was just saying like anybody, churches, whatever. I mean, really, when you're in recovery, it's more hands the better. Julie.
Yeah, I'm going to actually send you guys, all 4 of you experts or zone captain people, of some follow-up questions. But one of the key questions I have is I'm just trying to get my head around what are some of the communication platforms that you felt was most effective. And I think we're especially concerned about this because of COVID and because of our Latinx population that's really concerned about documentation of themselves individually. So whatever platforms you guys used or methodologies, whatever that might be. And then the other big question I really is what kind of funding do we need to start to kind of go after in order to not only get this program up and running, but potentially to have it be a long-term support system for the community?
So in terms of communication platforms, we are more rural than, I don't know, a lot of people, but our population was also on the older side. And so traditional social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, they don't work those platforms. Like I remember in the beginning handing out flyers, like follow us on Facebook. And this lady came up to me and she's like, can you just call me? And I was like, yes, I will figure that out. And we started phone trees. It really took off in zone 5 first, which was like more central of town. And then we kind of just based our phone tree need off of what that zone was telling us their communication style was. So depending on how you have your system broken down, I think it's really important to listen to what the needs are of that specific zone. For us, it varied drastically from zone to zone. Like in my zone, I had 2 mobile home parks and a large elderly community. And so the phone tree worked wonders. And then I was able to get in touch with 3 community members that have standing homes. And so they are able to, I mean, not in COVID times, but prior to COVID, they were able to go door to door and do stuff like that. Today, I mostly rely heavily on Facebook and the phone tree. And then as of recently, yesterday, we did updated postcards. Oh, funding. Let's see so I write stuff down. Funding. We went after a couple grants. We had a hard time with that. We had to do a lot of research. We actually took grant writing classes. It was really intense. Charles has been far more successful at that than we have. And I think he might be best suited to answer that question, because while we did go after funding, I think to date we only received like $12,000 in total of funding. It was heavily funded out of our own pockets for a long time.
And are you guys are you part of a nonprofit? Are you just an entity? Like, what's your fiscal structure?
Yeah, so we are under North Valley Community Foundation, which is like the umbrella for the 501c3. So we are not actually a 501c3 like Pam at Coffee Strong. She is an actual 501c3. We did not do that. Charles is a 501c3 also.
Jenna, I know it's 2:30. I want to be very respectful of your time. I'm sorry that. Thank you for
5 more minutes if anybody has anything else. I don't want to cut anybody off. You can always email me questions too. If my email is in the chat, please feel free to shoot me an email. I've been in communication with a couple people from Santa Rosa. I physically went to Boulder Creek. So if you need something, let me know.
Thank you, Jenna. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say that, you know, sometimes communities will be like, well, what do you want in return for all this? And I just want you to show up for the next crew of people. Because, you know, unfortunately, they're coming. And I just thank you for showing up, you know, again, all of you, actually, that I keep roping back. And I'm like, what are you doing, Pam? Hi, Pam. What do you need, Jenna? Jenna, what are you doing? Right? So I really appreciate it. It's a good example of, you know, you can be a year out from your disaster and be a huge help. You can be 2 years out and be even more help. So it's just something to note. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was good to see all of you again.
Good to see you. We're gonna we have to record the podcast.
Yeah. Oh,
we'll talk about it
need
later.
to do that. Oh my God.
Yeah, you gotta get back to Kyle.
I know.
Okay? Thank you. All right,
Okay,
take care, Jenna. We appreciate you. Okay. All right. The next thing, so a couple of things we can do here. I really wanted to get to. I know Pete's on here somewhere. I would like him to quick. Oh, hi, Pete. And then Pam's there. Okay, I'm keeping track of all of my moving squares. One of the things that was so remarkable about the block and zone captain system is that it really did accelerate the pace of rebuilding and the number of people willing to come back and rebuild. And so Pam can speak to that from a community organizing point of view. Pete can speak to it from both sides of having run a huge building department that tends to be slow. And then all of a sudden you get a disaster, and then it has to really speed up and be there when people are ready. And you know, that could be 1 month to many years. And so Pete, can you now give us a full bio, and hang with me, Pam. I see you there.
So can you hear me clearly now?
You sound beautiful.
Good. Oh, good. I'm so happy.
Yeah. Thank you.
So as Jennifer said, I was the director of the planning and building department here for the county of Sonoma for a long time. And I retired from that job in 2013, and since then I've been kind of semi-retired doing similar sorts of work on a whole variety of projects. So the Nuns fire is the fire that came through our neighborhood. It happened the same night as the Tubbs fire that got into Coffee Park and a bunch of other areas in Santa Rosa. We're out in the rural area outside of Santa Rosa, kind of between, if you know the geography here, kind of between Santa Rosa and Glen Ellen. And 3/4 of the homes in our neighborhood were destroyed in the fire, including ours. And so along with a bunch of my neighbors, we were all turned into instant developers because we had to figure out how to redevelop our properties and just where to start with the whole thing. And the magnitude of the event here in Sonoma County was, I think, one of the big drivers because on the whole, the unincorporated county and the city of Santa Rosa, we lost 5,300 housing units in one night. here. And so it was a tremendous workload from a planning standpoint and just a response standpoint. Debris removal was a huge issue. And then there's the whole issue of how do you rebuild. And as Jennifer pointed out, when you're running a planning and building department and you have to deal with permitting issues and you maybe deal with, a few hundred new home permits in a year, and all of a sudden you've got thousands to deal with, you got to figure out a different way to do it. And both the city of Santa Rosa and the county of Sonoma stepped up and brought in contractors to have what they call these resiliency permit centers that provided expedited plan review and sort of a dedicated staff of people that could work just on getting the permitting done for the rebuilds out there. I wasn't initially a block captain. We also called them neighborhood captains in our area, so they had kind of both of those names. But I came into it after it had been going for a few months. We met monthly. These were organized by the county supervisor's offices. So we actually had 3 supervisorial districts that were impacted by the fires here in Sonoma County. The first district, which is where I live, has a lot more of the rural communities in it. And so I'm not sure exactly how members were recruited. I think it was just the county supervisor's office reaching out to people that they knew in the community, who had connections in the community. So we had a very, in our first district neighborhood captains meetings, we had a real geographic diversity of representatives. There were probably 20 to 25 at a given meeting. We met once a month for a solid year plus, and then in early 2019 we went to sort of ad hoc meetings. We met a couple times during 2019, but we've done it mostly virtually. No virtual meetings, but email communications and whatnot to keep that going there. So the whole purpose of the neighborhood captain structure here in Sonoma County was to provide two-way communication. So it was communication from the neighborhoods to directly to the elected officials about what the issues were, what our needs were, what kind of things the county could be doing to in our case, to help us out, or the city in the case of the things that Pam was dealing with. And then communication from the elected officials and other county departments to the neighborhoods. And so kind of my role was before every neighborhood captain's meeting, I would poll my neighborhood. We had an email list set up in our neighborhood to facilitate that. And so I would look for issues, and there were always some issues to talk about. We would come to the meetings, we would talk about it, we would learn other things, we would learn about the debris removal program, we would learn about the permitting process and the things that people were going through, and then I would communicate that back to my neighbors. And so in my neighborhood, I acted as kind of an informal development consultant just because of the professional experience that I have. And, we were able to get a lot of folks back up on their feet and rebuild in, I won't say a short amount of time, because it really does take a while. It's a long game, but it was real helpful, I think. So I'll stop there, see what kind of questions we have.
Okay. Thank you. I think I just want to go to Pam really quickly, and then I'm going to go just to questions, just to make sure that because where Pete is super rural, and where Pam is, because most of you have met Pam before, and the first time that she spoke, that's a planned urban development, so it is different. So they were block captains, and they are a 501c3, so that decision to become one but how to handle the communication, she's also just a wealth of knowledge. So go ahead, Pam, welcome.
Sure, just touching on a few things. When we set out to organize and become Coffee Strong, we met weekly. Everybody a volunteer. You had to have been in the neighborhood, some in standing homes and some in homes that had burned, but there was nobody outside our geographic area that was a volunteer or a board member. So although people helped us and came to speak to us, in order to be a board member of Coffee Strong, you had to have those credentials, and you had to have been there at the time of the fire. We didn't have people join to our board who didn't experience it. there's certainly so much you learn by going through the process, and we wanted that to be a hallmark. We did, when we formed our 501c3, we were able to get some pro bono help from local professionals, from a lawyer, from people who helped us with our budget a little bit, and just asked, and we got some things without having to pay, although we did some fundraising as well. We were successful in some grants, we were successful in some fundraising. We did have to make some updated agreements about what it meant to be a block captain. Of course, if you're going through all of this and trying to recover, we gave each other grace to sometimes take some time off and then come back when you're ready, going through hard times. But there was an incident, and unfortunately I was on the receiving end of part of it, of somebody who just, you can imagine, of course, it's all very stressful. And there was one of our board members had some mental health issues, and we had to come up with an anti-harassment policy. And so we had to do some formal work around that to keep our meetings safe and our discussions a safe environment for working on the recovery. So it's kind of hard to deal with that kind of stuff, but it happens. So having some kind of formal agreements on how you're going to talk with each other. And since we were 501c3, we were not we're not addressing political issues. We were very careful about that. And we were also very careful about not recommending or endorsing builders or commercial outfits. We just tried to give people, here are options that we have learned about. Here's what we know about them. We used a website. We tried to build because we had some web developers who were in our neighborhood who were volunteering, tried to build our own from the ground up registry, private forum in a WordPress site where you would register, you had private discussions, and it took so long, it was a failure. It was a lot of work went into it. And just because it took so long, and it was, we were all working for free, and it was hard to pressure these people to do it faster. So I would say if you're going to build something like that, get something out of the box. There are things available that you can buy. Web platforms that have members, private forums, private registries, and use those because you need to be able to work more quickly. We got information. So of course you all know this, like everybody's gone. You want to organize the neighborhood, but nobody's there anymore. So even though it wasn't COVID, we were still doing webinars. We were still doing Facebook Live sessions because people lived far away. Some people even out of state during the recovery. And so we used surveys, SurveyMonkey a lot. We used MailChimp, emails. We had somebody who's a web developer who donated some of her server space for our website, so we didn't have to pay for that. And we just built up our mailing list and tried to connect with people through multiple ways. And sometimes that was making phone calls, and sometimes that was Nextdoor, and sometimes that was Facebook or Twitter. But it just depended, trying to get in touch with people. And that just like we were just hearing from Pete, it's that two-way communication. So the city was very interested in hearing what we were getting in our surveys, and we were sharing that information with them, and they wanted to know what the hot button issues were. And when there were specific challenges, we would do more research and create blog posts that had more long form information to share out. And those were shareable. That I thought was a good idea, because if we shared a blog post, it could go email, it could be printed and handed to somebody, it could be put in our newsletter. We created a newsletter, and it could also be shared on social media. So you can create one piece of information that's quality and then send it out through many channels.
But you have to have somebody with those skills on your team. So
yeah,
that's an important role.
Yeah, and that's what's interesting, because we didn't like pick and choose who was volunteering there. But what we learned over time is people fell into different roles because of the background that they had or the expertise. I knew I was a an academic, so I knew how to write and vet information. So I did a lot of that communication stuff. But other people were actually contractors, and other people were electricians, and some other people were educators, and whatever they could bring. And so what happened over time, as more and more people got permits and more people were building, we actually dismantled the block captain work to some extent, and instead created task forces, initiatives, and committees based on subject matter. For example, I led an effort to help people understand how to put in water-saving, drought-tolerant landscapes. And so we had a landscape committee, and it served the whole area. But we held webinar, we had like education. I built a website of indexing all kinds of plants and showing pictures of them and all kinds of things like that, addressing one particular issue because it was something I was willing, it's like, okay, what am I willing to put forward? What am I going to budget my time for? I'm going to do this thing, because after a while it became, you could be a generalist to a certain extent, but I want to focus my effort on this, where somebody else focused on all the lampposts and somebody else focused on all the mailbox issues.
Mailboxes was a hot button issue, you guys. Just
It
so
was.
You know.
And somebody else,
Because
PG.
Be aware of this in advance. Yeah.
And so you step up sidewalks, and somebody else picks something else. And that hopper wall that we all talked about, that rebuilding that wall, that was somebody's project. And helping with mental health issues, that was another area that I personally got involved with. But you just figure out what you're going to work on, and fundraising is another, and the park. So there were all kinds of things. But after that immediate, like super duper intense first year and a half, then we started to branch off into these specialties a little bit more. Yeah.
Well, that's good. That's helpful, like a time period too, because you guys are like 6 months, and Santa Cruz and Alameda and Santa Cruz are about the same exact time period. So go ahead. Questions for Pam and Pete. And if you have one for Charles, great. Otherwise, I told him he could just hang out off camera and listen in case somebody had a question.
I had a question for later on for Charles. I would love to ask about the housing library stuff and how that kind of folds into that. We're trying to work out how the outreach portals work, so that's very effective and set up already when the Zone Captain program kind of comes on board. That there's already that communication effort happening. We worked pretty hard to build sort of those. Alex was here, and we have Anna Byers, our city council, and they're all kind of in place to hold that piece of like, I'm ready for when those needs come up from the community, and they're ready for this program to happen. But I had a question more generally about sort of equity, specifically like racial equity, and how how the Zone Captains program was able to support that. Jennifer, as you've mentioned, our demographics are very similar in the populations that were affected, and I just want to see more specifically what we can say about that, or what we can learn about that, and how that process of bringing that population back can be supported with Zone Captains, Block Captains.
So I don't know. I'm curious to see what Pam and Pete say about it. I would say we did not do a good job here in Sonoma County necessarily on that issue. I think we did a really good job like setting up UndocuFund to replace wages. And I think we did, and that's an amazing organization. And Iko Sophie, would you actually put the link in the chat? Undocu, we knew during the fires, we knew who was being affected. And so I remember having a conversation. The only one night I did go to a bar, it's true. And I was talking to one of the Rotary members, and I'm like, people are going to need money though, and people who aren't going to qualify for these funds. And so UndocuFund, which they took the system that we started at La Luz Center, and I'm sure that they'd be very happy to have a whole other one of these calls if you were interested. I think absolutely that the people who were not well served was the Latinx population, though, beyond the fact that we were very like, here's money, but how do we replace the homes? Like in a place that already didn't. Now we at Rebuild have definitely invested in building trades programs so that people who live here would be able to be retrained in order to help with the rebuild and have a higher wage job. And we specifically, and Iko Sophie has done a lot of this work through our Rise Up Grants program, have made sure, so it's really important to look at retraining. But I would say we did a great job within DocuFund. I think that COVID showed us though how we didn't do the job we should have done. And that's on an Office of Equity at the county level, because Rebuild paid for all of the little videos to tell everybody in Spanish what was going on every single day, because the county didn't expect a global pandemic. So I think that I think they've learned their way through to a better place today, but I actually think it took COVID to get there, like to even like prioritize that if you have an evacuation, we've had lots of them, that you have people there who are trusted in the community to say that, ICE isn't here, ICE can't come here. We have to, you have to make that announcement right away. But for the long-term rebuilding, I don't think that was our strong point at all. And I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. Pete, what would you say? I know Pete is there because I can see his phone number. Pete? Did you hear that question, Pete? Okay, I'll go to Pam. Pete and Pam.
Oh.
Pam?
How am I doing now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, so much better. Yeah, there you are. Hi.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
The glitchiest Zoom I've ever been on here. So I agree with what you said, Jennifer, and I would also just emphasize that I've seen a lot of evolution at the county level in terms of addressing equity over the last several years. As Jennifer mentioned, we now have an Office of Equity and an equity officer at the county. And so particularly here in the pandemic, you're seeing a lot more targeted outreach to the Latinx community here in Sonoma County, events being organized specifically for that community in the geographic areas where those folks are. And I would also point out that, like a lot of places, Sonoma County is a fairly segregated place geographically. And so the areas that were burned in the 2017 fires did not get into the areas of our community that have a really high concentration of Latinx population. And so I think it wasn't as much of an issue, for example, for them in the rebuilding aspect of it as it is now with COVID or with the economic impacts that resulted after the fires and with COVID. But I fully agree with Jennifer. We didn't do a very good job of reaching out to whatever segment of the Latinx community really needed help at that point back in 2017.
Elin has a question.
Yeah, it's a little follow-up on that. From both of your perspective, what were some of the barriers that made it hard for you to, that you feel might have made it hard for you to connect with that community? Were there not organizations on the ground already who you were connecting with? I'm just curious, from your evaluation, why didn't you do such a good job?
I think Pam, I don't know if you can see Pete, but Pam has her hand up, so we're going to kick that over to her and then we'll kick it back to you.
A couple things. In Coffee Park, we were a relatively affordable single-family home rental neighborhood. So while we had 1,400 homes, 40% of those were rentals. And I know, and one of the reasons why I moved there 20 years ago is I loved how diverse it was. And I've got folks who are from Africa, from Thailand, from Mexico, all over living on my street. And I loved that. What happens though is who rebuilds the house is the owner and not the renter. And where do those renters go? My next door neighbor was a Mexican family, intergenerational, that lived right next door. We yelled at each other out the window when the fire was there and the get out now. Those were our next door neighbors. Down the street, good friends, Fijian caregivers, husband and wife family. They were renters. I personally stayed in touch with them. I saw them in Target, after the fire, like they were trying to make ends meet. They were trying to find a new place to live. But it, just like with anything else, it was hard to keep track of where those folks went, what resources they had. Sadly, of those 40% of homes, we found out that only 29% of them had renter's insurance. And so, a huge majority of those folks really didn't have anything except for some Red Cross money, some benevolent funds coming from collections from concerts or Redwood Credit Union or the church that they belonged to and things like that. So tragic. Now, I did hear wonderful stories down in Roseland, it's Southwest Santa Rosa, where there's a community garden established and a nonprofit called Land Paths.
Yeah.
And Land Paths has this amazing staff member, Jonathan Bravo, who manages that garden. And that garden immediately upon the fire became a gathering place and a place to get food. And the very simple thing of making sure that food was going to be cooked and available for folks, anyone who came there. And it just became not only a place to get food, then it became a place to get information and to make connection. And we know resilience is really supported when you have those human connections that you can rely on and trust and get help. So that's one example of how a very needy community, because that is probably one of the needier parts of Santa Rosa, was able to get some help and make some connections and find out about resources that were available. I know a woman in my neighborhood who is a homeowner who is Mexican, and she came to some of our meetings and said, where are all the Latinas? Where are they? They weren't necessarily coming to our meetings because our meetings were in English. They also might not have been homeowners. They may have been renters. And so another initiative that I've been involved in through an organization called Santa Rosa Together, another community organization that's been around for a while, is having not only landowners and homeowners be active in city planning decision-making, but to have the renters have an equal voice in city planning decision-making. Where's the affordable housing gonna go? And are we checking in with renters on where they think that should be? So that's kind of a more systematic big picture thing.
Okay. I can speak to it as well, but I see that Pete, Pete, did you want to add to that, or are you good, or if I can?
Well, I guess I would just say in response to Elib's question about obstacles, I think the biggest obstacle was sort of institutional inertia and a lack of really engaged thinking at an institutional level. That was just, you know, for a long time it's been, we meet the needs of our Latinx community by printing our materials in Spanish as well as English, and kind of end of story. And you know, we all know that that's not enough. I think, or maybe this is wishful thinking, I don't know, but I think that if we had an area of high Latinx concentration of population wiped out by the fire, I think that we would have had to do things differently. Wouldn't have had a choice there. But I think that's probably one of the issues that contributed to the lack of outreach as well.
I'm going to go to you, Julie, but if I can just pile on. So I worked with Ico, Sophie, and I live in Sonoma Valley, is about 52% Latinx. And this area in Roseland are the two heavy populations. And they did not burn down. They were evacuated, and they've had issues with PSPS power outages. And so certainly, but their jobs took a huge toll. But we did see in all of our fires, farm workers who live on the properties have often lost their homes and their livelihood all at the same time. There's been a mixed response from the people who own those wineries and those vineyards, but there's more pressure, and kind pressure, not like me. We called them in. Everyone's been calling them in. That's before you call them out. And I think that it's really been effective because we've had many fires since 2017. Now in 2017, we also had a new administration. I'm not going to get political here, but clearly a lot of our undocumented neighbors were extremely freaked out. And so the only way that we could serve them is through our trusted organizations like La Luz and Corazon Healdsburg and Land Paths. But as far as the rebuilding is concerned, you know, it wasn't there wasn't enough back and forth communication. We had to deal with renters, like rental replacement, finding them a new home. That was how we dealt with it. So it wasn't in the rebuilding, it was in the in putting them in new homes as often as possible and making sure that they could pay their rent and replace their wages. And it's an ongoing, evolving and really important part of what we all do in the field of disaster. Go ahead, Julie.
So I just wanted to know if anyone had any experience with one of the things I think that we're struggling with is because it's such a huge proportion of the people who've been affected by this fire are the Latinx community and really the working Latinx community. And they are not only taxed by the fact that they're having to deal with the trauma of losing their home, losing all of their property, possibly losing their livelihood, being dislocated from the community in which they've felt established and safe. But now they're also being asked to show up and donate time to help us figure out how to help them. And that's a tough thing to ask. And yet at the same time, everyone keeps talking about this. It's like, why are they not here? Why are they not part of the conversation? And a lot of that is that they don't have the time, they don't have the bandwidth. And so I'd love to know if anyone has any experience of like, how do we support that community to have more bandwidth, to have more capacity, so that we can engage them in the critical conversations. And how do we sort of define those critical conversations so that we're not wasting their time as much as possible. And I know I'm probably asking something that nobody has a perfect answer.
Oh no, in fact, we're gonna learn from you. Just so you know, like we were very specific at Rebuild and we pulled the demographics and we saw the number of mobile homes you lost in the Latinx community. Thank you, Jody. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'll connect with you. We specifically chose your fire because you have this population and the type of housing. And it seemed like, well, we want to, go not only help them, but see what we learn, so we can help the next group better, because what you're talking about is a huge mystery for a lot of people. I want to say two things. I think that Pam, there's something to that if you need somebody who is working, and you have these people I know, but who is paid intern, who is bicultural and bilingual and who's like helps with the face of it. And we struggle here to find those people too, because it's tough, but you also don't want to be like one more council of white people who are sitting there deciding what the Latinx community needs. I will say that I'm glad Fannie Mae is on this call. We had a conversation with them earlier. I do encourage you to connect directly with Sidra to talk to her about a couple of the things they have coming up or things that are done. That I would find a way to do some sweat equity to build your way back into your home, into home ownership, even if they were renters before. Do you want to rent a home? Do you want to do you want to replace that manufactured home, or what I forgot what I was supposed to call it. Cidra's going to laugh at me. That mobile home with another mobile home, or with a smaller footprint home, and do you want to actually own the land beneath you? Because I think that's with the Latinx community in particular, like that's why they're here, man. They want a better life. They want a path to homeownership and legacy and generational change, something for their kids. And if you can show them that, you will be worth their time. But it's a population. You have to make it worth their time, because they would rather be at home with their families and not with you.
And that's manufactured housing resident owned community, or ROC. So
ROC. Yeah, do you want to talk about that, Sidra? Is it too early? Because I'm just so
I can give a little bit a brief synopsis, because it obviously so one of the ways that we can and when I say we, Fannie Mae can lend to projects is through an underlying mortgage to a co-op. And then if the co-op is structured properly, where both the co-op entity, the legal entity, owns both the manufactured housing unit as well as the land, Fannie Mae can do both the underlying mortgage to the association, but also do single family loans to individual homeowners, which brings down the interest rate from a traditional MH, loan substantially. It could be 2-3 times even more with interest rates being so low today. And so this is something we are exploring. One of the difficulties is that because this is like a sort of a new concept, we need to work with, unfortunately, a new resident-owned community to set up this structure. Because the way most MH communities work is somebody owns the land, and then the homeowners, quote unquote, own the units. And so it's having them own both is the key factor here. Or I should say the co-op owning both, sorry.
So
that's my little, and it's going to get much more complicated. And please, my email is in the chat. Jennifer knows how to reach me, Tucker knows how to reach me, and I can go into much more detail if you would like me to. It's a much more complicated conversation. So.
But it's very exciting, though, Sidra.
Yeah, Sidra, I'm definitely going to follow up with you because one of my roles is I'm the vice president of the local food co-op, and we actually want to help develop some workforce housing in conjunction with a development of a store. And we've actually looked at the potential of like selling air rights above our store to a housing co-op, which might be another way to kind of take a look at it. But I will follow up with you. Jennifer, I would love to see if we could do a C2C maybe in the next couple of months about sort of like visionary and alternative ways to finance things, and really talk about what are all of those potential different structures. Because I think part of it is getting all of those things to talk together, and who can, if this one can move a little this way and this one can move a little this way, we might actually be able to get them to start to work, especially for
and that's what we're here. Yeah, and that's what we're here for. One thing I will plug, and I think Tucker has heard about this, is we are working on a new webpage. So we have knowYourOptions.com, which is Fannie Mae's homeowner and renter facing website. It's in a lot of plain, simple language, but basically a sort of one-page flyer / webpage saying, don't pay off your mortgage until you have a plan. As you know, a lot of folks who have already been through the process will know it's much easier to rebuild if you still have a mortgage, which doesn't seem it seems counterintuitive, but it gives you more funds to actually pay off. And so I will be sharing that with this group as well. Hopefully on Monday, we're supposed to be getting that final version. So I'll be quiet now.
Sorry, they're emptying this. This is why I usually do these when I'm at work. Okay, keep going on the questions. We've got Pete and Pam.
Okay, needs assessments. I'm sorry we lost Alex and some other folks here, but needs assessments are kind of an important one. And there's various efforts right now to do community needs assessments. Some have been horribly failing, and some have been maybe more successful, but perhaps too targeted to really provide a cumulative needs assessment. We're putting all our chips that we make talent in on GIS technology because we have a lot of access to some very interesting just demographic data through the American Community Survey, et cetera. But part of the value of this program when we approach funders to support it is in being able to conduct targeted needs assessment based on whether it's a mobile home neighborhood or a single family residential or a 55 and older or open space ag land or a business corridor. And that very targeted sort of needs assessment stuff is what we want to really get into. And I'm wondering what success stories or, best practices y'all have experience with in that.
I got nothing on that.
Pam, I didn't, go ahead. I was typing something to Elin, so I didn't even hear the question. Pam, what do you have to say?
I do a bit of needs assessment in my day job, but with Coffee Strong, we ended up doing a lot of survey work, and we did the block captain communication system of checking in and then reporting back. What are the problems we're hearing? And then synthesizing that information like, oh my goodness, this we've heard a few and now we're hearing a lot. This is going to be a widespread issue. But I'm wondering also about focus groups, because you've got very different communities and situations. If you have the ability to have little calls like this with a small group, I think in a small group, you end up getting people bouncing ideas off of each other or getting a little bit more information, just finding out what those stumbling blocks are, what their greatest needs. It's possible that might be also a really, and you can also read body language and hear if they're really telling you everything. Possibly that might be another way to go to get some data.
Yeah, we can go. Ellie and Julie and I and Elib and Nicole can go all day long talking about the needs assessments, slogging through and what needs to be on that. But as far as like, just you mentioned surveys. That's sort of the same thing. And you use SurveyMonkey. There's many platforms for that. What was the success rate, for instance, of getting response when it came from the block captain?
Well, for instance, one time when we did the SurveyMonkey that was very successful is we had a panel discussion with some high interest topics about contracts with your builder and insurance issues. And we didn't let anyone in the building until they verbally answered all our questions, and we had volunteers typing all their answers in. So it was an entry ticket into getting into the event. Perhaps you can do that on Zoom too. In order to, you have an Eventbrite, people have to fill out the survey to actually get the link to the Zoom. And then that would be a way, you have to give some kind of, you can have this free webinar if you give us this information.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that you almost have to target, and I want to see if Pete and Pam agree with me. And then I actually have a question for Iko Sophie. I think you almost have to do, that's the beauty of the block captains, is that like Pete was in this rural neighborhood, fairly expensive homes. And so what they needed there is just not going to look the same as what was needed in another burn area. So you have to, I think that Jenna's point is actually really well taken, that you're going to have maybe different communication styles for each of your zones, and you're going to have different needs, and you'll get to know your zones and your zone captains and what their needs are. And there are certain things based on demographics that you can, you can assume, but the best thing, that our best tool has always been, what do you need and how can we help in any language? And that I would set up zone captains and then figure out questions, like, be nimble so that you start to recognize how different areas are going to need different things. Like for all the mobile home communities, for example, like they should, they're going to have different owners. I think how would you say there's one that's already a co-op? Is that what I heard the other day? That the rest of them, not yet. Okay. Okay. So I would probably work on the zones and then start to ask the questions and have it be very short and simple, because you have people who are stressed. And Pam, and then I wanted Iko Sophie to weigh in on the communications issue with the Latinx population, because we spent about 6 months, sitting in those meetings, especially for COVID. So she's done a lot of work in that area. But Pam, you wanted to interject with me?
I'm just going to add a little tidbit. Is like when you create those surveys or write your questions, and even the way you gather the information, is it an open paragraph? Is it a Likert scale? Is it a number? How you're collecting that? Think to yourself really clearly about, and maybe this is obvious, but when I get this data, am I going to be able to do something with it? I found that having to really have other people look at the survey and how we divide it, to have it actually be something that you can synthesize. If it's all open paragraphs, am I going to code the answers? How am I going to bring it together to figure out trends, and really like think analytically about that, so that when you get it and you're like, well, now what the heck do I do?
Yeah.
Okay, wait, Iko Sophie, will you address like anything that you learned? Do you have any recommendations for communication styles, especially to the Latinx community? We found that text messaging works well. Yeah.
Text messaging works well. Sorry, I haven't spoken for a while. My voice is gone. I what we've found recently and over again is it going back to a trusted source. Is it, you can't just randomly send a text message to a huge group of people and have them be like, oh yeah, I'm going to take this information as valid. You have to really seek out the people that the demographic that you're choosing to and hoping to engage trusts. And that is the number one thing. And then asking those key people, those key stakeholders in your community, what are their preferred methods of communication? Sometimes it's radio. There, a lot of the ag workers listen to very specific radio stations, and being able to work with those radio stations to get messages out has been really helpful, and especially around disasters, because they're in remote areas and they're tuning into very specific things. And what we've learned is from Sonoma County is relatively large. From one end of the county to the other end, there's very different radio stations that people are listening to. So you have to, as much as you want to like say this is how we're going to communicate with everybody, you have to kind of get into the really micro details of where people are paying attention, because like you said, and you guys all know, these people are maxed out right now. They are exhausted. They're on sensory overload. You do not want to be trying to push information at them in a way that they're not familiar or comfortable with, because it's not going to be, it's digested well, right? So you want to go to the places where they already have, for some people it's religious, it's, churches.
Wow.
The faith groups are huge in terms of outreach to different demographics, and that especially in a time of crisis, that's where people hold their safety net. That's where they really feel safe. And so if you can reach out to those, leaders in your community, big time. And now someone else is, yeah, Pamela mentions libraries and schools. We've worked really closely with our superintendent here in town because she knows what these families are dealing with. And that, again, there's
and she's a
also,
Latina, so
and
she
she's Latina.
wasn't, so she's bicultural too.
And also, when you're dealing with a language factor, a lot of these kids are really used to translating their information for their parents. And so, already getting, going through the school district and going through their schools and their teachers, that's a really trusted source of information. And that's a great way of reaching people and engaging.
We
So
also
yeah,
ran
churches,
into the
libraries,
issue.
teachers, radio. I'm trying to think. Yeah.
Radio is huge though, because we also have a group of folks here who speak an indigenous language, who do not speak Spanish. And so how to also make sure that they were, especially when COVID happened or with the evacuations, it was like, how do we make sure that everybody's hearing what they need to hear to stay safe? And so we'd be on those calls and we would just send that radio station $1,000 every time she talked, because we were like, PSA. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to say about needs assessments, they're only going to capture so much. And so prior to working with Rebuild, I did disaster recovery in the same county with a slightly different community. And what I learned, we tried to do a whole asset mapping project and needs assessment project. And what we learned is that when you ask questions and people fill out a form, you only get so much information. When you sit down with people, which is really hard to do right now with COVID, or you get on the phone with them, or you do something, an activity where you're packing bags, volunteering together, and you're having that conversation, things surface that normally you won't hear in the needs assessment. So I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, that those relationships and those like authentic, real conversations where you are building trust with people, that's where you get really juicy tidbits of knowledge that are so crucial and really hard to capture in a needs assessment. Just wanted to share that. Makes your work a little bit harder, takes time, but it is a different type of information, and you're building something slightly different, which is trust, which if you guys, a lot of you are in the long-term recovery game, you need that trust.
The hard thing too is that what they need right now is not going to be the same as what they need in 3 months. And we see that all the time in disaster.
Right. So if you've already established that relationship and that conversation, they know that they can come back to you 6 months from now and be like, by the way, this has come up and I didn't realize it was going to come up. And we hear that all the time. I start with a grant and then it changes. And they have to feel comfortable to say, listen, I said I was going to deliver on this and I needed that, but it turns out that this really just evolved, and they need to have the space to be able to do that.
Can I ask Pam?
We have about 12 minutes left. I just want to do a time check, so I'm respectful of your time, but go ahead, Tucker. Thank
Just,
you,
you know, I
Ike,
heard-
Sophie. Perfect.
Thank you. Yeah, I heard media buys in there, and I think, or at least, you know, some sort of PDF. So we're working with like Caminos, you know, the Spanish language, which is now transitioned more to online than actually print, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, that's COVID. But what sort of budget did you guys spend, Pam, as far as radio outreach, et cetera? Was that some part of your outreach efforts?
Everything was free because we reached out and told our story. Sometimes we wrote out the whole article. We created a good relationship with our newspaper. We were regularly on the radio because we would come up with a good hook. You know, like, here's something we're doing. Oh, did you hear about this family? Oh, we're gonna do bingo. Like, we were like doing all these things, and we said we want to tell our story. We had a winery that a local wine store label some wine as a fundraiser for fire survivors, and like we went on to promote the wine. I mean, all kinds of things, and we were like, we got to tell the story, and we'd be on the radio. We never paid anything for that. The only thing that we ever paid advertising for is if we had to like is photo, and even sometimes this we got donated to photocopy some things, or Facebook promotion, promoting our page on Facebook, which, you know, but usually it was like 20 bucks. We do 20 bucks, not too much on that. In fact, our operating budget, which I've been involved in just our infrastructure, so paying for liability insurance, paying for any licenses, paying for our website. I mean, it's all like $3,000 period. That's it. You know, like we can operate with very, very slim financial needs. It's when we get the big money, it's when we're going to do something big, like try to repair things. Then that's where we need more money. But keeping our organization going is not expensive.
COVID has changed a lot of that. That's why we're kind of really working on repositioning and making it as much online as possible. And there's not that person-to-person contact as much, so it's a very different sort of game, and we're kind of creating as we go along.
Totally. Hey, Pete, did you want to add to that, or any? Because you've gotten a lot of press too. I mean, it helps that we all know you.
Yeah, well, that's really been the thing, is, you know, who you know and who the media folks know, because they need to know that you're there and available and can answer questions and whatnot. So building relationships with the media folks, I'm sure you already know this, is really, really important.
Well, but I think you can't be said enough, though, because once a reporter, you know, once you're in their cycle and they get assigned something and they're working on 5 or 7 stories, whatever it is, and then if they know if they've got a stable of people they can call to get the quotes, or, you know, put you on the front page, then they do that. And so developing those relationships are so important, and then it helps a lot for this whole group. Because they were also in the Washington Post, the New York Times, they were, you know, and certainly and on the regular news, the local news too. So we certainly saw them. I think they were on, and I think you guys on like not a 2020, but something like that. So once you sort of build a little media machine, it really does change the trajectory of how you get your needs met. And I highly recommend that you pursue it, you know, and it's possible, like over the next few months, that you know, Pam or Pete, that they could also leverage maybe some of their contacts, or like if you're interested in Southern Oregon, or if you're interested in Santa Cruz, and you can talk to these people about also our relationship and how that's helpful. That's a hook right there.
I also want to ask real quick. So, you know, we're considering having like multiple captains per zone, just because of this kind of goes back to the Latino representation part, and bringing them home. Is like we're talking about having multiples because it was very integrated, very mishmashed in together, and some of those zones were cross, et cetera. So that might be an option. Do y'all think that would be helpful? I'm seeing Pam nod.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. unless you get the group to a size that it becomes unmanageable. That would be the trade-off that I would see. But you know, having more brains working at this is always a good idea.
We were never able to fill all our posts that we needed to. My area, which was the largest of the 5 areas, was we needed 10 more, but we did it anyway, right? Like we could, you know, we did our best with what we had. Well, it was never enough. Anyway, but I was
keep it
saying
moving.
about your media story, have a personal, heart-wrenching part of it when you tell it, or uplifting, or something very personal, because the media will love that part.
I spent 15 years.
They will love that. They'll also love that you're being so mindful, though, of what it means to serve a heavily Latinx community that's super vulnerable. You had a population that was vulnerable. You had seniors and Latinx in mobile home parks, and you are like bending over, like you are really working hard to reach, not to reach down, but to reach across. You know, and you know, to be respectful and appropriate and relevant, and that matters, because it's not as common as it should be. And I think people care about that more so right now. I think they're more aware right now of how the growth inequities. I was actually listening to the press conference yesterday with John Kerry talking about climate change and the cost of it. And really it becomes very much an equity issue. So Lucy, did you want to add anything? You've been very quiet, and I don't want to talk all around you.
I honestly have just been sitting here kind of soaking everything up, because it's been an interesting almost 5 months for me, and the different roles that I've done and continue to do and will continue to serve. And so just hearing what everyone's bit of expertise is helping me put together several pieces, not just for my 8 to 5 and post recovery, but now also looking at more of the long-term recovery side of it. So for me, it's been super informational and just much appreciated. And I'm sure I'm going to be picking your brains at some point through this process, as well as Tucker and everyone else, just because I think your information is invaluable. And I do think that there's a lot more that we could be doing right now for our community. And so especially being kind of in that Latinx and being a local and migrant work family upbringing, obviously it's very near and dear to my heart, and it will continue to be that way. And so, yeah, I'm very appreciative of everyone's knowledge sharing, and it takes an entire group of people to make sure that this work gets done correctly. So I appreciate it.
It does. And you know, we've been talking a lot about, you know, what do we actually do? And what we do is we just try to like go to these other communities and show you that it's possible, and to give you hope, and to say we know it's hard, and you will get through it. You will get through it, and you will learn, and you'll become the teachers. But keep your, you know, hope at the center of it, especially in the long-term recovery, can become a very important scarce resource sometimes, because you're like, especially when you have more fires that come after the first one. But it is possible, and you can do it. Yeah, well, thank you so much, you guys. Do you have anything to end with? We have, otherwise I can go ahead and let you all go for the day. I really want to thank Pete and Pam, and all of you, for your time and for showing up, and for showing up for your community. And we're always here if you need us.